Ancient Egypt hid a monument more staggering than the pyramids. Historians wrote of a lost labyrinth with 3,000 rooms, a wonder that vanished completely. By the end of this, you will know if this legendary maze was ever real or just a magnificent story. We will follow the clues from classical explorers, examine why modern technology keeps finding hints of its walls, and discover what its purpose reveals about a pharaoh's ultimate power. How does a civilization lose something so immense? Herodotus walked the sands of Egypt nearly 2,500 years ago, a wide-eyed traveler from Greece collecting stories as if they were rare artifacts. He spoke with priests, measured monuments, and tried to make sense of a civilization that was already ancient in his own time. And then he saw it, or so he claimed. A structure so immense it made the Great Pyramid seem almost modest by comparison. He called it the Labyrinth. His description is precise enough to feel trustworthy, yet grand enough to strain belief. He wrote of a single encompassing 12 great roofed courts all connected, their doors facing one another in a perfect, bewildering symmetry. 6 courts faced north, 6 faced south, all joined by a complex of passages and chambers that he said numbered 3,000, half below the earth and half above. The scale alone was meant to inspire awe, a project commissioned not by one pharaoh, but by 12 kings ruling together, each building a court as their eternal memorial. Herodotus concluded in no uncertain terms that the pyramids were beyond words, yet this labyrinth surpassed even the pyramids. This is the cornerstone of the entire mystery, a first-hand account from a foundational historian. But here is where our modern skepticism must gently engage. Herodotus was also a storyteller, often recording tales told to him as fact. He wrote of giant ants that mined for gold and of tribes that slept for 6 months of the year. So when he speaks of 3,000 rooms, we must ask, was he meticulously counting? Or was he using a number that simply meant beyond counting, a metaphor for the infinite? His account is a mixture of measured observation and the overwhelming impression left upon a foreigner. He wasn't just describing architecture, he was describing a feeling, the sensation of being utterly lost in human achievement. This emotional truth may be as important as the architectural facts. He gave the world a name and a scale for this wonder, anchoring it to a specific place near Lake Moeris in the region known as the Fayyum. Because of him, the labyrinth was never just a local myth. It became a fixture of the classical world's imagination, a challenge written into history, waiting for someone else to find it. Herodotus planted the seed, but it was later writers who let the legend grow and branch into new forms. Nearly 4 centuries after his visit, the Greek geographer Strabo journeyed to Egypt as part of a Roman expedition. He too sought out this fabled structure, and his account adds a layer of solemn purpose missing from the earlier description. Strabo confirms the location near the city of Arsinoe in the Fayyum, and he describes not just courts and chambers, but a great temple at the labyrinth's heart. More intriguingly, he states it served as a collective tomb, not only for the kings who built it, but also for the sacred crocodiles revered in that region. This detail transforms the labyrinth from a purely administrative or symbolic marvel into a sacred space, a bridge between royal power and divine animal cults. The endless corridors now seem to guard not just political legacy, but the eternal rest of both rulers and their holy beasts. Another century passes, and we encounter Pliny the Elder, the Roman naturalist whose thirst for cataloging the world's wonders was insatiable. In his monumental natural history, he includes the Egyptian labyrinth in a list of the most spectacular buildings ever constructed. His description, however, is notably brief, almost an echo of a by then well-established fact. He calls it the most extraordinary achievement of human wealth and industry, but he offers no new architectural details. This is perhaps the most telling clue of all from the Roman perspective. By Pliny's time in the 1st century CE, the labyrinth was less a physical place one might visit and more a celebrated idea, a byword for impossible complexity and scale. Its story had solidified into legend, repeated by scholars but perhaps already fading from the tangible world. Comparing these three voices across 500 years reveals a fascinating evolution. For Herodotus, it was a staggering engineering feat that overwhelmed the senses. For Strabo, it was a sacred funerary monument steeped in local religious practice. For Pliny, it was a historical wonder, a checkbox on a list of human triumphs. The labyrinth was adapting to the minds that described it, becoming a symbol for whatever each era valued most, be it ambition, piety, or sheer grandeur. Yet through all these shifting interpretations, one point remained stubbornly consistent: the specific mention of the Fayyum Oasis region. This geographical anchor, repeated across generations, is our first solid thread to pull on. It tells us the legend was not floating freely in the desert. It was always tied to a real place on the map, a place where stones might still lie buried, waiting to confirm which version of the story, if any, was true. The Fayyum was not just a dot on a map, it was a deliberate masterpiece of human ingenuity. This vast, fertile depression west of the Nile functioned as the beating heart of the Middle Kingdom's ambitions, and its lifeblood was the massive, ancient Lake Moeris. To understand why a labyrinth would be built here, we must see the land as the pharaohs saw it, not as a desert but as a promise. The lake was not a natural accident, it was a managed reservoir of astonishing scale, a hydraulic engine that turned seasonal Nile floods into year-round agricultural wealth. Canals and dikes controlled the water, transforming the Fayyum into a green breadbasket and a testament to royal power. A king who could command water could command life itself. And it is precisely here, at this nexus of engineering, administration, and abundance, that the ancient texts place our lost labyrinth. This proximity is the crucial clue. Such a monumental administrative or religious complex would make perfect sense at the center of this managed landscape, a place where tribute was stored, rituals were performed, and the authority of the king who tamed the waters was set in stone. The region was also the epicenter of the cult of Sobek, the powerful crocodile god who embodied the fertile yet dangerous forces of the Nile. A labyrinth described as containing sacred crocodile tombs fits seamlessly into this theological terrain, a place where royal and divine authority intertwined. Today, the Great Lake Moeris is much reduced, known as Birket Karan, a quieter body of water reflecting a different sky, but the land around it whispers of the past. The area is dense with archaeological sites from the very period of the labyrinth's legend, including the pyramid of Amenemhat III, a pharaoh deeply connected to Fayyum development. This context transforms our search. We are no longer just looking for a mysterious maze, we are looking for the likely administrative and religious nucleus of one of ancient Egypt's most ambitious projects. The labyrinth, if it existed, was not an isolated wonder. It was the logical, perhaps even inevitable, crown of a civilization asserting its mastery over nature. The stones, if they are there, are waiting in the one place they've always been described, a place where water, faith, and power once met. The whispers of ancient texts finally met the measured steps of modern science in the middle of the 19th century. A new kind of explorer arrived in Egypt, armed not with poetic ambition but with notebooks, calipers, and a relentless drive to catalogue. Among them was the German scholar Karl Richard Lepsius, leading a Royal Prussian expedition in 1843 with a singular mission: to systematically record every monument, every inscription, to bring order to the chaos of millennia. When his team reached the Fayyum, their attention was drawn to a site near the village of Hawara, just south of the shrunken Lake Moeris. What they found was not a towering, intact maze, but something perhaps more telling, a sprawling, devastated landscape of stone. The ground was a colossal puzzle, littered with countless fragments of polished granite and limestone, foundations that hinted at vanished walls, and the ghostly outlines of what might have been immense courts. The sheer scale of the debris field was overwhelming. To Lepsius, this could not be the remains of a simple temple or a lone pyramid. The area covered was vast, and the volume of shattered, high-quality stone spoke of a deliberate and monumental demolition. In that moment, looking across that sea of ruins, the legend solidified into a location. He confidently declared this to be the site of the ancient labyrinth, a conclusion based on the geography matching the classical accounts and the staggering amount of architectural wreckage. His identification was a watershed. With it, the labyrinth ceased to be merely a story debated by historians and became an archaeological problem to be solved. Hawara was now firmly on the map as the prime candidate, the place where the truth must lie buried. Yet Lepsius' tools were those of his era: meticulous drawing, surveying, and surface collection. He could not launch the massive excavations needed to trace the floor plan of a 3,000-room complex. His work was a brilliant starting point, a foundational hypothesis etched in scholarly reports, but it was ultimately a surface scan of a mystery that ran deep. He left behind a compelling question, not an answer. Was this shattered plain simply the quarry for later buildings, or was it the final, plundered testament to a wonder that once was? His legacy was to give the next generation a place to dig. Nearly 50 years after Lepsius stood amid the rubble, a man arrived at Hawara with a very different kind of patience. Sir Flinders Petrie is often called the father of systematic Egyptian archaeology, and for good reason. He pioneered a meticulous, almost obsessive approach to excavation, measuring every fragment, mapping every layer. Where others sought treasure, he sought context, and at Hawara he had a clear target: the mud-brick pyramid of Amenemhat III, the very pharaoh whose reign transformed the Fayyum. Petrie believed the answer to the labyrinth mystery lay not in the open field of stone chips, but right beside this royal resting place. His work revealed something astonishing: the sprawling foundations of a gigantic structure attached to the pyramid complex. The scale was undeniable, a vast grid of walls and courtyards that stretched across the landscape. With the certainty of a scientist who had followed the evidence, Petrie made a bold declaration: this was it, the foundation of the legendary labyrinth itself. But here the story takes a puzzling turn, one that every archaeologist dreads. The evidence both confirms and contradicts. The structure Petrie uncovered was monumental, but it was built primarily of mud brick, the common, practical building block of everyday Egyptian architecture. This was not the gleaming, polished stone of Herodotus' description, not the halls of granite and limestone that would inspire poets. Petrie faced a dilemma: had the classical historians exaggerated, or was something else at work? His solution was a theory of absence. He proposed that the labyrinth had indeed been a stone-clad marvel, but in the centuries after the fall of ancient Egypt, its valuable facing stones had been systematically stripped away, quarried for other buildings in nearby cities. All that remained was the cheap, unattractive mud brick core, the skeleton of the wonder. This paints a profoundly frustrating picture for history. It suggests we are not looking for a buried labyrinth, but at its ghost, the negative space where grandeur once stood. The immense courtyard complex Petrie mapped could very well have been the administrative and religious heart of Amenemhat's Fayyum project, a place worthy of the name Labyrinth in its complexity and purpose. Yet without the stone skin, without the inscriptions and the polished floors, it is a whisper where we hope for a shout. Petrie's mud brick enigma leaves us with a compelling but incomplete verdict. Yes, a huge complex existed exactly where the legends said it should be, but its physical form had been erased by time and human hands, leaving us to wonder if the true wonder was not just in the building, but in the stories its ruins inspired long after it was gone. But the mud brick foundations at Hawara were not the final word. A compelling rival theory emerged, pointing its finger just a few miles north to a place called Biahmu. Here, the landscape tells a different story of scale. In the late 19th century, archaeologists discovered the remnants of two immense stone pedestals, each once supporting a towering seated statue of Pharaoh Amenemhat III. These were not ordinary monuments, they were colossi, perhaps reaching 60 feet in height when intact, visible for miles across the flat Fayyum basin. For some scholars, this staggering grandeur felt like a better match for the awe described by Herodotus and Strabo. How could a sprawling mud brick administrative complex, however large, compete with the visceral impact of these stone giants gleaming in the sun? This alternative view proposes a radical shift in understanding. Perhaps the labyrinth was never a single, roofed building with 3,000 rooms. Instead, it might have been a vast ritual landscape, a sacred precinct encompassing multiple sites across the Fayyum, all dedicated to the power of the king and the god Sobek. In this model, the pyramid complex at Hawara served as the royal funerary core. The Biahmu Colossi acted as monumental sentinels guarding the approach, and other temples and courtyards formed a network of processional ways and ceremonial spaces. The experience of moving through this designed landscape, from one colossal statue to a maze-like temple to the pyramid itself, could have been profoundly disorienting and awe-inspiring, creating the sensation of a labyrinth without walls. This theory challenges us to rethink the very word. Was a labyrinth defined by its interior corridors or by the overwhelming feeling it produced? If the goal was to humble visitors and demonstrate the pharaoh's god-like control over space and belief, then a vast, interconnected ceremonial district would achieve that just as powerfully as a single enclosed maze. The debate between Hawara and Biahmu is not merely about pinning a name on a map. It is a clash of interpretations about how ancient power was manifested in stone. One view sees the labyrinth as a functional, albeit massive, administrative center, its wonders stripped away by time. The other envisions it as a theatrical landscape of dominion, where the journey itself was the masterpiece. Both ideas stem from the same tantalizing clues left by the classical historians, proving that sometimes a great mystery does not narrow to a single answer, but expands into richer, more complex possibilities. 3,000 rooms is not just a large number, it is a logistical puzzle carved in stone. To grasp the scale Herodotus described, we must step away from the legend for a moment and think like a builder. Imagine the largest structure you have ever been inside, a grand museum, a sprawling airport terminal, a historic palace. Now multiply that space not by 2 or 3, but by dozens. The labyrinth, as reported, would have covered an area far greater than any known palace complex from the ancient world, including the later Roman palaces. Modern architectural estimates suggest that to house 1,500 rooms on a single level above ground, even with modestly sized chambers, would require a foundation spanning hundreds of acres. The material cost is almost incomprehensible, requiring quarries to be emptied and an army of laborers working for generations. This is not necessarily proof against its existence. The Egyptians were masters of such monumental efforts, but it does frame the claim as an undertaking of almost unimaginable priority and resource. The specific division Herodotus noted between rooms above and below the earth is the most tantalizing architectural clue of all. It was not a random design choice, it was a profound statement of purpose. In the Egyptian worldview, the world above was for the living, for administration, ceremony, and the display of power. The world below was the realm of the eternal, of tombs, sacred crypts, and rituals meant to bridge this life and the next. This blueprint suggests a building that was quite literally a map of the cosmos, a physical manifestation of the Egyptian understanding of reality. The upper labyrinth could have been a buzzing center of regional governance, where scribes managed the bounty of the Fayyum, where priests prepared for festivals, and where foreign dignitaries were meant to be overwhelmed by the state's sheer capacity. Then, through hidden passages or a single, guarded stairway, one would descend into the silent, perpetual night of the lower labyrinth. Here, in the still, cool earth, might have rested the mummified sacred crocodiles of Sobek in their own stone sarcophagi, alongside the burial chambers of the kings who built this place. The psychological impact on a visitor granted access would have been total, a journey from the dazzling, sunlit complexity of human order down into the dark, eternal mystery of the divine. This architectural speculation moves us beyond the simple question of whether it was real, and into the deeper question of why anyone would attempt such a thing. The labyrinth was not just a building, it was an experience engineered to produce a specific feeling, a sense of awe so profound it bordered on disorientation. To walk its corridors was to be physically immersed in the power of the king and the gods, to feel that power in the endless repetition of walls and doors, in the transition from light to darkness. Whether the number 3000 was precise or symbolic, the intent behind the story is clear: to describe a place that was meant to be unforgettable, a monument not just to a king's wealth, but to his ability to reshape the very world into a testament of his reign. So when we sift through the rubble at Hawara or gaze at the pedestals of Biahmu, we are not just looking for walls, we are searching for the footprint of an idea, one grand enough to haunt history for 2,500 years. Perhaps the labyrinth's greatest power was not in its walls but in its meaning. To understand it fully, we must see it not as an ancient office building or a tomb, but as a kind of machine, a vast stone engine designed to run on belief. Egyptian cosmology viewed the universe as a fragile balance between order, called Ma'at, and the ever-present threat of chaos. The journey to the afterlife was the ultimate test of this balance, a perilous voyage through a dark and winding underworld filled with deceptive gates, mysterious guardians, and dead ends. This journey was literally mapped out in texts like the Book of the Dead, a guidebook of spells and passwords to navigate the celestial maze. Now, imagine making that spiritual journey physical. A real-life labyrinth, especially one with a hidden lower level plunged into the earth, could have served as the ultimate training ground and initiation chamber. Priests and high officials might have walked its corridors in ritual reenactments, learning the turns and passages they would one day need to know in the afterlife, their footsteps echoing in a rehearsal for eternity. For a pharaoh, this function was magnified 1,000-fold. His entire reign was a performance of maintaining cosmic order, and his death was the most critical transition of all. A labyrinth attached to his pyramid complex would be a monumental declaration, a statement that he had not just built a tomb, but had constructed the very path to immortality itself. It turned the abstract challenge of the underworld into a conquered, architectured reality. This symbolic purpose is inseparable from the man most associated with it, Amenemhat III. His reign marked the peak of the Middle Kingdom, an era of renewed central power and breathtaking ambition. His greatest legacy was the taming of the Fayyum itself, that massive hydrological project that turned wild marsh into fertile field. He didn't just control people, he controlled nature, redirecting the chaotic waters of the Nile flood into the orderly grid of canals and Lake Moeris. His labyrinth, then, becomes the architectural echo of this achievement. Just as he engineered the landscape to produce agricultural abundance, he may have engineered this stone maze to produce spiritual security. The building and the lake were two parts of the same machine, one harnessing water, the other harnessing myth, both working to demonstrate the king's absolute command over the forces that sustained his kingdom. So when we ask what the labyrinth was for, the answer transcends storage rooms or crocodile crypts. It was a tool for thinking, a three-dimensional diagram of the Egyptian mind. It made the invisible pathways of the soul tangible in limestone and granite. It transformed the pharaoh from a mortal ruler into the eternal navigator, the one who knew the way through the ultimate maze, guaranteeing not only his own passage but by extension, the continued order of the world he left behind. The true wonder is that long after its stones were scattered, that idea, that function, continues to guide us through the historical maze it left behind. The crocodile was not merely a fearsome creature of the Nile, but a living vessel for a god. In the lush, water-rich Fayyum, the cult of Sobek reached its zenith, and this divine connection may hold the key to understanding the labyrinth's true heartbeat. Sobek, depicted with the powerful head of a crocodile, embodied a potent duality. He was a god of fertility and renewal, his presence linked to the life-giving flood. Yet he was also a symbol of raw pharaonic power and military might, a reminder of nature's untamed protective fury. To venerate Sobek was to acknowledge both the bounty and the peril of the waters that made Egypt possible. Strabo's specific note, that the labyrinth served as a tomb for sacred crocodiles, is a startlingly practical detail amidst the grand descriptions of scale. It transforms the monument from an abstract wonder into a place of daily, living ritual. This suggests the complex was not just a memorial for these animals in death, but almost certainly a sanctuary for them in life. Imagine sections of the labyrinth not as silent halls, but as vibrant, carefully engineered habitats. Channels and sunken pools would have brought fresh water from Lake Moeris into shaded courtyards, creating enclosures for revered reptiles. Priests would have moved through dedicated corridors to feed and care for these sacred manifestations of Sobek, perhaps even presenting them to select visitors or during important festivals. The labyrinth, in this light, becomes the ultimate integrated temple complex. One wing could house the administrative scribes managing the gods' vast estates and offerings. Another could contain the private chapels for royal ceremony, and at its operational and spiritual core would be these living, breathing incarnations of divine power. The psychological effect is profound. A visitor navigating the confusing passages might not only feel lost, but could also hear the distant splash of water or catch a glimpse of a massive shape gliding through a pool behind a stone colonnade. The maze was not just confusing, it was alive with a sacred, potentially dangerous presence. This zoomorphic dimension solves a riddle of purpose. Why build something so staggeringly complex? Because it needed to accommodate not just people but a god in animal form. The needs of the sacred crocodiles, their security, their care, and their ceremonial role could have dictated an architecture of separate zones, restricted passages, and secure chambers, naturally resulting in a labyrinthine layout. The stone corridors were not silent. They echoed with the sounds of a thriving, unique ecosystem of faith, where the boundary between animal and deity, between sanctuary and palace, was beautifully and intentionally blurred. The name we use shapes everything we think we know. Labyrinth is a powerful, evocative word, but it is a Greek word, a label applied by outsiders centuries after the stones were laid. The Egyptians who designed and walked those corridors would never have used it. To them, this place likely had a name rooted in function and geography, something precise like the temple of Amenemhat at the entrance to the lake. Official inscriptions might have called it a great enclosure, or used terms denoting a monumental administrative and religious complex. This is not just a minor translation issue, it is a fundamental shift in perspective. When Herodotus heard stories of this immense, confusing structure, his mind did not reach for Egyptian bureaucratic terms. It reached for the most powerful metaphor his own culture possessed, the story of the labyrinth of King Minos in Crete, home to the mythical half-man, half-bull creature. In that single act of naming, he subtly recast an Egyptian achievement into a Greek mythological framework. The complex was no longer just itself, it became an echo of a familiar legend, a real-world version of a monster's maze. This linguistic layer is a filter we must consciously see through. It reminds us that the most famous descriptions we rely on are not neutral reports, they are interpretations. The Greek lens emphasized awe, confusion, and perhaps a hint of danger, the sensation of being lost. The Egyptian intent, however, was likely centered on order, containment, and sacred function, a controlled environment for ritual and governance. Unpacking this name game forces a crucial question. Are we searching for the Minotaur's maze, or are we searching for the great enclosure at the lake's edge? One is a story of heroic conquest over chaos. The other is a story of a pharaoh's mastery in organizing the world. They can feel similar, but their hearts beat to different rhythms. By remembering the original name, we strip away a layer of classical romance to look again with clearer eyes at the stones themselves, seeking not a myth, but the footprint of a specific king's ambition in a specific, engineered landscape. The stones did not simply vanish into thin air. If a structure of such legendary scale once dominated the landscape, its absence today demands a physical explanation, one rooted not in myth, but in the practical history of a land constantly recycling its own past. The most logical and sobering answer is systematic quarrying, a process that treated ancient Egypt not as a museum to be preserved, but as a vast, open-air warehouse of pre-cut building materials. From the Roman era onward and accelerating through the medieval period, the great monuments were seen as resources. Limestone facades, rich in calcium, were hauled away to be burned in kilns, producing lime for mortar and plaster. Hard granite columns and lintels, already beautifully shaped, were too valuable to ignore, often repurposed whole for new temples, churches, or mosques. Fine basalt paving stones made for excellent durable floors in other cities. A remote, largely abandoned complex in the Fayyum, far from the central authority of later capitals, would have been a perfect target. Its isolation, once a mark of sacred seclusion, became its greatest vulnerability, allowing teams to dismantle it stone by stone over generations without much notice or interference. This slow, relentless demolition solves the core material mystery. It explains why explorers like Petrie found only mud brick cores, the cheap skeleton left behind after the valuable stone skin was stripped away. It turns every ancient mosque in nearby Cairo, every medieval fortress wall in the region, into a potential archive. A granite column in a Cairo mosque or a worn limestone block in a village house in the Fayyum might not bear a cartouche of Amenemhat III, but it could very well be a silent refugee from the Labyrinth, its original story erased by its new function. This idea transforms the search from looking for a standing building to looking for echoes. The labyrinth, in a very real sense, might be all around us, dissolved into the fabric of later Egypt, its grandeur dispersed but never truly destroyed. Its physical form was sacrificed to the needs of living cities, leaving only its legend and its foundational ghost to hint at what was lost. The desert holds its secrets deep beneath the surface, but the 21st century has given us new ways to listen. Where explorers once relied on shovels and intuition, modern teams now scan the Earth with technological sensors that see through sand and time. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy downward, painting a picture of buried structures by measuring how they reflect the signal back. Electrical resistivity tomography works like an X-ray for the soil, mapping differences in how the Earth conducts electricity to reveal hidden walls, filled pits, or empty chambers. Even from space, high-resolution satellite imagery can detect subtle variations in vegetation and soil moisture, hinting at the ghostly outlines of ancient foundations pressing up from below. These are the tools of a new kind of archaeology, one that seeks to map the past without disturbing a single grain of sand, offering a promise of revelation without the irreversible act of excavation. Focused intensely on the sands around Hawara and the wider Fayyum basin, these surveys have not returned empty-handed. they have revealed tantalizing anomalies, vast geometric patterns of straight lines and right angles lying silently under the desert floor, shapes that whisper of human intention rather than random geology. Some of these subsurface features align on a staggering scale, suggesting the footprint of something immense and organized. Yet here lies the modern challenge of this ancient mystery. The very scale of what we are looking for creates a problem of perspective, distinguishing the buried footprint of a 3,000-room administrative complex from the remains of later Roman farms or from natural sedimentary layers is a task of immense subtlety. A straight line could be a pharaonic wall, or it could be the edge of an old irrigation canal from a millennium later. Technology gives us the data, but it still requires the human mind to interpret, to sift the signal of a lost wonder from the endless noise of history. The results so far are profoundly suggestive but not yet definitive. They tell us that something major is indeed buried there, that the area is archaeologically dense with human activity across ages, and that the stories of a monumental structure are not echoing in a void. Yet they have not yet provided the clear, incontrovertible floor plan of the labyrinth that would end the search. In a way, this technological chapter mirrors the entire history of the quest. It offers new hope and sharper clues, narrowing the field of possibility, but the final proof remains just out of reach, a shape sensed but not yet fully seen. The desert, it seems, has learned to hide its treasures in plain sight, revealing just enough to keep us looking, listening ever more closely to the silent stories told by the earth itself. In 2008, the sands of Hawara witnessed a quiet technological revolution. The Mataha expedition, a joint effort between Belgian and Egyptian scientists, brought sophisticated ground-penetrating radar to the very site Flinders Petrie had pointed to a century before. Their goal was not to dig, but to see, to peer through layers of time and soil without disturbing a single grain. The results, when processed and mapped, sent a ripple through the world of archaeology. The radar scans revealed something startlingly clear beneath the flat, featureless surface, a colossal geometric grid. The data painted a picture of what looked like endless walls, running in parallel and perpendicular lines, forming a dense honeycomb of chambers and corridors. This was not a random scatter of rubble. It was the ghostly blueprint of an immense, organized complex, buried just a few meters down. The scale of the subsurface structure matched, almost eerily, the vast dimensions hinted at in the ancient texts. For the first time, modern science seemed to be providing a tangible, physical echo of Herodotus's description, a rectilinear maze frozen in the earth. This grid pattern is exactly what one would expect from a massive administrative or storage complex, a place of order and compartmentalization, not a singular temple. The evidence felt compelling, a silent answer rising from the deep. Yet here the story encounters a modern form of suspense. Despite the promising data, no large-scale excavation has yet been launched to follow the radar's map. The world is left with a powerful suggestion, a compelling set of lines on a screen, but not the definitive proof of uncovered walls and inscribed stones. The labyrinth remains in a state of tantalizing potential, its existence strongly indicated but not yet physically confirmed. This pause is not unusual in archaeology, where funding, permissions, and the sheer responsibility of unearthing a potential wonder require immense planning. So we wait, knowing that somewhere beneath the Egyptian sun, a grid of shadows lies in perfect silence, holding its breath until the day a careful hand finally brushes away the sand and turns a radar echo into history. The radar images from Hawara present a modern archaeological dilemma as intricate as any ancient maze. We possess a compelling digital ghost, a grid of shadows beneath the sand that whispers of a monumental discovery, yet the shovels remain still. The most pressing question is no longer about what is down there, but why we haven't simply gone to uncover it. The answer lies in a contemporary labyrinth, one woven from political will, economic reality, and the living landscape of modern Egypt. The Fayyum is not an empty desert, it is a vital, green agricultural heartland, fed by the same ancient waterways the pharaohs mastered. The very fields that might hide the labyrinth's foundations are today's source of livelihood, producing crops that feed families. A suspected site could lie directly beneath a village lane, an irrigation canal, or a farmer's ancestral plot. To excavate on the scale required would mean a profound, decades-long disruption, potentially relocating communities and rerouting essential water sources, an undertaking of staggering social and economic complexity. Beyond the human dimension, the financial and logistical calculations are immense. A full excavation of a structure potentially spanning hundreds of acres is not a single season's dig, it is a multi-generational project. It would require a small army of archaeologists, conservators, and engineers, along with a continuous river of funding that must compete with countless other national priorities. For Egypt's antiquities authorities, the guardians of a civilization's entire physical legacy, every decision is a careful balance. They must steward limited resources across thousands of known sites, from the pyramids of Giza to endangered temples in the south, all while protecting new discoveries from environmental threats and illegal activity. Launching a colossal excavation based primarily on geophysical anomalies is seen as a high-risk venture. What if, after moving a village and spending millions, the radar patterns reveal not polished halls, but a later Roman warehouse district or a uniquely dense natural geological formation? The professional and financial stakes are enormous. This creates a modern grid of challenges, a bureaucratic and practical maze where good intentions and scientific curiosity must navigate tight corridors of permits, funding cycles, and preservation ethics. For now, this intricate web of real-world considerations forms a barrier as effective as any wall of stone, leaving the labyrinth's truth to wait a little longer in the dark, patient silence beneath the earth. The word labyrinth is a bridge between two worlds, one of stone and one of story. For the Greeks, it was not an Egyptian term but their own, forever tied to the dark myth of King Minos, the craftsman Daedalus, and the monstrous Minotaur trapped at its heart. So when Herodotus stood before that bewildering Egyptian complex, his choice of label was far from accidental. It was a deliberate act of translation, taking something foreign and immense and framing it within the most powerful metaphor his own culture possessed. This single word sparks a chicken or egg riddle that has fascinated scholars for centuries. Which came first, the idea or the building? Did the pre-existing Greek myth of a monsters may simply provide a handy name for a similarly confusing Egyptian structure? Or could the flow of influence have run in the opposite direction? There is a compelling argument that early Greek travelers and mercenaries who had contact with Egypt centuries before Herodotus might have brought back tales of a real, staggering stone maze in the land of the pharaohs. These stories, passed down and transformed by generations of poets, could have provided the seed, the architectural inspiration, for the legendary Cretan labyrinth. The myth then grew around this imported core, adding the layers of heroism and monster that made it a timeless tale. This theory transforms the Egyptian labyrinth from a passive subject of description into an active player in the mythology of another civilization. It suggests the Fayyum complex was so profoundly impressive that it did not just earn a Greek nickname, it helped shape one of Greece's most enduring legends. Whether the influence traveled from Egypt to Crete or simply resonated powerfully later on, the connection elevates the labyrinth's significance. It was no longer just a local wonder or a royal administrative hub. It became an archetype, a universal symbol for any place of terrifying, beautiful, inescapable complexity. Its very name, given by outsiders, ensured its story would never be contained by the borders of Egypt, but would wander forever in the shared imagination of the ancient world. A ruler's legacy is often written in the landscape he leaves behind. For Amenemhat III, the sixth pharaoh of Egypt's mighty 12th dynasty, that landscape was the entire Fayyum oasis. His nearly half-century reign stands as the absolute pinnacle of the Middle Kingdom, an era not of conquest but of profound internal mastery. His genius was not expressed on distant battlefields, but in the patient, revolutionary control of water. He looked at the unpredictable, swampy basin of the Fayyum and saw not a problem but a promise. Under his command, engineers executed one of antiquity's most ambitious public works projects, a vast network of dikes, canals, and regulators designed to harness the annual Nile flood. They transformed the wild lake Moeris into a massive, managed reservoir, taming the chaotic life force of the river to create thousands of acres of new, reliable farmland. This was power of a different kind, the power to create abundance from marshland, to turn seasonal uncertainty into year-round prosperity. It was an economic engine that fueled his kingdom's wealth and solidified his authority as a provider, a true shepherd of his people. This context is everything. A pharaoh who could command the Nile itself would not settle for a modest tomb. His monuments needed to reflect the scale of his earthly achievements, to be as enduring as the agricultural revolution he set in motion. This explains his unique architectural signature, not one, but two massive pyramids, the first at Dosha and his final, more elaborate resting place at Hawara on the edge of his reclaimed Fayyum. These were more than tombs, they were anchors in a sacred geography he was defining, and it is right here, adjacent to the Hawara pyramid, that the labyrinth almost certainly took form. Think of it not as a separate wonder, but as the essential, sprawling companion to his eternal house. If the pyramid was the private, sacred peak of his afterlife journey, the labyrinth was the public, overwhelming base of operations for his perpetual cult. It would have been his mortuary temple complex on a scale never before attempted, a city of stone dedicated to the endless rituals needed to sustain his spirit forever. Every offering recorded, every priest's procession, every act of worship performed in those countless rooms was a brick in the metaphysical dam holding chaos at bay. This building frenzy was not mere vanity, it was the ultimate expression of a pharaoh's duty. Amenemhat III was crafting a machine for immortality, an eternal engine that would continue to function long after his passing, ensuring his name, his authority, and the cosmic order he upheld would resonate through eternity. The labyrinth, therefore, is the key to his mind, the stone manifestation of a king who reshaped nature and sought to do the same with time itself. Herodotus's specific mention of 1,500 rooms below the earth is not a random detail, it is a direct line into the Egyptian mind. In a culture where the sun's daily journey was the central drama of existence, the world beneath the ground held profound and specific meaning. It was the realm of the Juat, the mysterious underworld through which the sun god Ra traveled each night, battling chaos to be reborn at dawn. It was also the eternal resting place for the justified dead. So when we hear of a vast subterranean level, we are not just hearing about basement storage, we are hearing about a deliberate architectural recreation of that sacred, hidden geography. This transforms the labyrinth from a single building into a cosmological model, a machine built to mirror the structure of the universe itself. The sun-drenched upper courts, with their open air and bustling activity, represented the world of the living, the realm of day and visible order. A descent into the cool, silent, and perpetually dark lower chambers would have been a sensory shock, a deliberate passage into the symbolic underworld. The very act of walking down would have been a ritual in itself, moving from the known into the mythic. Within that manufactured darkness, several powerful possibilities unfold. The most practical explanation is that these chambers served as the final resting places for the sacred crocodiles of Sobek, each mummified reptile interred in its own stone sarcophagus in a hall of honor. They could also have held the burials of the royal family, lesser nobles, or high priests, creating a necropolis within the complex, ensuring their eternal proximity to the pharaoh's power. Another compelling theory casts these rooms as a vast treasury, securing the immense wealth of the Middle Kingdom, the gold, grain, and tribute that flowed from the fertile Fayyum. Yet the most spiritually resonant idea is that these spaces formed a ritual theater. Priests could have performed the essential ceremonies that mirrored Ra's nightly journey, chanting from the pyramid texts or the coffin texts in the total blackness, using the architecture to enact the sun god's victory over chaos and, by extension, guarantee the pharaoh's own resurrection. The labyrinth's true genius may have been this holistic experience, forcing a visitor to physically and emotionally traverse the entire Egyptian cosmos, from the blinding light of earthly power down into the sacred dark where that power was eternally renewed. The story of the labyrinth did not end with the fall of Rome or the silence of the quarries. As Europe entered the Middle Ages, a different kind of keeper began to preserve its memory, not in stone but on parchment. In the quiet scriptoria of monasteries, medieval monks meticulously copied the works of Herodotus and Pliny the Elder, their quills tracing the same astonishing descriptions of a 3,000-room maze in a distant desert. These handwritten manuscripts became fragile time capsules, ensuring that the wonder of Egypt was not completely lost to the West, even as its physical monuments faded into legend. For these scholars, the labyrinth was not an archaeological puzzle. It was a historical fact recorded by the ancients, a testament to the sheer scale of the pre-Christian world's ambition. It was a moral lesson in stone, a reminder of the transience of even the greatest earthly powers. This act of copying was an act of faith in knowledge itself, a thin thread of continuity that kept the idea alive through centuries when no European eye could verify its truth. When the Renaissance dawned, bringing with it a feverish rediscovery of classical texts, that thread suddenly pulled taut. The labyrinth emerged from the margins of manuscripts and stepped directly into the burgeoning world of cartography and speculative scholarship. Mapmakers tasked with illustrating the known world and its wonders began to include it in their depictions of Egypt, yet without a physical reference they had to invent. The labyrinth appeared not as a grid of administrative halls, but as a perfect concentric circular maze, a design borrowed directly from the familiar church labyrinths found on European cathedral floors. This was a fascinating act of cultural translation. The Renaissance mind, enchanted by geometry and symbolic perfection, reimagined the Egyptian wonder in its own idealized image. It became less a building and more a diagram, a beautiful, logical puzzle printed proudly on maps that claimed to document reality. This period also saw the birth of Egyptomania, that sweeping wave of fascination with all things ancient Egyptian. As obelisks were excavated and tales of pyramids spread, the labyrinth was absorbed into this grand, romantic vision. It became a staple in the cabinets of curiosities and scholarly treatises, a peer to the other great mysteries of the Nile. Scholars debated its location and purpose, often mixing the scant classical facts with layers of allegory and speculation. It was no longer just a building, it was a symbol of ancient wisdom and lost engineering secrets. This reinvention, for all its fanciful inaccuracy, proves something profound. The labyrinth's power had transcended its original form. It had become a movable idea, a blank canvas upon which every era could project its own ideals of mystery, genius, and the sublime. The fact that Renaissance thinkers felt compelled to include it, to draw it, and to argue about it shows that its absence was as compelling as its presence. A void in the desert had grown into a permanent fixture in the imagination of the West, a ghost monument that refused to be forgotten. A blank space on the map is an irresistible invitation for the artist's hand. With no surviving ruins to constrain them, illustrators and architects across the centuries have filled the void with their own dreams, each rendering of the lost labyrinth a mirror held up to their own time. In the 17th century, as wealthy Europeans embarked on grand tours and collected tales of the Orient, the labyrinth appeared in lavish travelogues not as a crumbling ruin, but as a pristine, geometric marvel. Engravings from this era show it as a sprawling, perfectly symmetrical palace complex, all orderly colonnades and manicured courtyards viewed from a godlike perspective above. This was not a chaotic maze, it was a diagram of rational power, reflecting the Baroque era's obsession with harmony, control, and the absolute authority of kings. The artists were less concerned with archaeological accuracy and more with visualizing a classical text's claim to grandeur, creating a symbol of enlightened civilization triumphing over the unknown. Shift forward to the 20th and 21st centuries, and the visual language transforms completely. Modern digital reconstructions and concept art trade sunlight for shadow. The labyrinth becomes a place of oppressive scale, with cyclopean stone blocks, deep, receding corridors swallowed by darkness, and a palpable sense of claustrophobic mystery. This interpretation speaks to our contemporary fascination with the psychological, the subconscious, and the alienating weight of history. Our labyrinths are less about celebrating order and more about exploring the experience of being lost within it. They channel the aesthetics of fantasy cinema and video games, where ancient ruins are sites of adventure and peril. This evolution from a sunlit palace to a shadowy dungeon reveals a fundamental shift in how we view the past, no longer as a model of perfect order to be admired from afar, but as an immersive, often unsettling, environment to be navigated from within. These artistic journeys form a captivating parallel history to the archaeological search. Each interpretation, whether a meticulous copperplate engraving or a hyper-realistic computer-generated fly-through, answers a different need. The Baroque engraving satisfied a craving for comprehensible splendor, making the unknown knowable through rigid geometry. The modern digital rendering feeds a desire for experiential immersion, for feeling the awe and disorientation firsthand. Neither is right or wrong, each is a form of storytelling. They show us that the true power of a lost wonder lies not solely in its stones, but in its endless capacity for reinvention. The labyrinth becomes a cultural Rorschach test, its imagined form reflecting our deepest attitudes towards power, mystery, and our own place in the long narrative of human achievement. We are not just looking for a building, we are watching the history of imagination itself, drawn in ink and pixel, forever trying to complete a picture that time deliberately left unfinished. Such a colossal complex could not have been a silent, empty monument. It would have hummed with life, a small city in stone dedicated to its own perpetual operation. To maintain the rituals, guard the sacred precincts, and manage the offerings, a permanent population was essential. Think of the priests who performed daily rites for Sobek and the royal cult, the scribes meticulously recording incoming grain and goods, the artisans repairing statues and frescoes, the guards patrolling the endless corridors, and the servants who prepared food and kept the lamps burning. This was not a weekend pilgrimage site, it was a full-time, functioning institution. This practical reality shifts our perspective dramatically. It suggests the labyrinth was far more than a temple or a tomb. It was likely the beating administrative heart of the entire Fayyum province. Within those countless rooms, we might find not just shrines, but also vast granaries storing the region's agricultural surplus, controlled by the state. Workshops for crafting ritual objects and maintaining the complex's infrastructure would have buzzed with activity. Barracks housed the soldiers who provided security and perhaps enforced tax collection. Most importantly, a dedicated wing would have contained the scribble offices, the ancient equivalent of a regional capital building, where administrators in the pharaoh's name managed land surveys, labor assignments, and the distribution of resources. This transforms the labyrinth from a place of purely spiritual mystery into a center of tangible, everyday power. The offerings brought to the temple were not just spiritual gifts, they were a form of taxation, a redistribution of the region's wealth that sustained the priesthood, the workers, and the state's authority. A farmer delivering a portion of his harvest to the labyrinth storehouses was participating in both an economic transaction and a religious duty, his contribution ensuring both the god's favor and the government's continued function. This seamless blend is key to understanding ancient Egyptian society. There was no separation between church and state, between the sacred and the bureaucratic. The pharaoh was a god, his officials acted with divine authority, and a government building was by its nature a holy space. The labyrinth, in this light, becomes the ultimate expression of that principle. It was a machine where spirituality and logistics were the same engine, where every administrative scroll was also a prayer for order, and every tally of grain reinforced the cosmic balance maintained by the king. To walk its halls was to witness the divine machinery of the state in motion, a place where the abstract concept of mat or cosmic order was made real through ledgers, storerooms, and the steady rhythm of daily work. Perhaps the most radical solution to this ancient puzzle lies not in stone but in water. A compelling modern theory suggests we have been looking for the wrong kind of maze entirely. The true labyrinth of Amenemhat III may never have been a building in the traditional sense, but rather the breathtakingly complex hydraulic system he engineered to tame Lake Moeris. This was a living, flowing maze of canals, dikes, regulators, and sluice gates, a network of waterways so vast and intricate it could genuinely be described as labyrinthine. Its purpose was to precisely control the lake's water level, transforming seasonal floods into a reliable, year-round source of irrigation for the newly reclaimed Fayyum farmlands. The scale of this undertaking is almost impossible to overstate. It required an intimate understanding of hydrology, topography, and mass labor organization that rivals the construction of any pyramid. Canals would have branched and subdivided like arteries, delivering life-giving water to thousands of individual plots, while a system of embankments and gates prevented destructive flooding. This was environmental engineering on a godlike scale, a literal reshaping of the earth to serve human need. From the ground or from a boat navigating these channels, the experience would have been one of profound disorientation and wonder, moving through a seemingly endless, man-made aquatic landscape where every turn was decided by human hand. So, could the classical historians have simply conflated two awe-inspiring sights? Imagine Herodotus or Strabo arriving in the Fayyum centuries after its peak. Local guides, proud of their ancestors' achievement, might have taken them to see the remnants of this colossal water management system, its channels still functioning, its earthen walls still defining the land. Standing before this network, they hear tales of the great king who built it, and they also see the nearby massive temple complex at Hawara. In the mind of a Greek traveler for whom a labyrinth was a singular, famous structure, these two separate marvels, the water maze and the stone complex, could have easily fused into one legendary account. The 3,000 rooms in this reading become a metaphorical count for the countless irrigated plots of farmland, the individual chambers of fertility created by the hydraulic grid. This theory does not dismiss the existence of the great temple complex, but it redefines the primary source of the awe. The true lost wonder was not just a place of worship or administration, but the very mechanism that made life in the Fayyum possible. It suggests the greatest monument Amenemhat III left behind was not a tomb for his body, but a sustainable future for his people, written not in hieroglyphs, but in the flow of water across a reclaimed desert. The grandest Egyptian monuments usually shout their names from the stones, but the labyrinth whispers if it speaks at all. This is one of the most puzzling gaps in the entire story, a profound silence in the very records of the civilization that supposedly built it. For a structure described as surpassing the pyramids, we have no definitive inscription, no papyrus ledger, no royal decree that explicitly names and details the great labyrinth at Hawara. This absence is a historical void that forces us to question everything we think we know. Where are the proud hieroglyphs proclaiming its completion? Where are the prayers carved for eternity within its walls? This silence could mean several things, each more revealing than the last. Perhaps the complex was never called a labyrinth by the Egyptians, that poetic label belonging solely to the Greeks. In the native records, it might be referred to by a functional, bureaucratic title, something like the Great Temple of Amenemhat or the Estate of the Crocodile God, names so common they blend into 1,000 other temple inventories. Its true identity could be hiding in plain sight within a damaged papyrus or a reused stone block, waiting for the right context to be understood. Another possibility is more sobering. The destruction and quarrying of the site began so early, perhaps even before the end of the New Kingdom, that its specific memory faded from Egyptian historical consciousness long before Herodotus arrived. When the stones are taken, the name often follows, leaving only a local folk memory that eventually dissolves. The most challenging interpretation of this silence, however, is that the classical accounts did indeed magnify a more conventional, though still immense, mortuary temple complex. The Egyptian texts that do survive from the Middle Kingdom are precise. They list the names of pyramids, the endowments of temples, the deeds of kings. If the labyrinth was essentially Amenemhat III's sprawling mortuary temple, a standard part of any pyramid complex just executed on a gargantuan scale, it may not have been considered a unique category worthy of a special name in the annals. It was simply the temple of his pyramid, the largest of its kind, but not a new type of wonder. This evidentiary gap is a humbling lesson in the fragility of history. Our understanding of a civilization is not built on the totality of its experience, but on the fragile fragments that survive fire, flood, reuse, and time. It is also shaped powerfully by the voices that chose to record their impressions. We are dependent on the perspective of outside observers like Herodotus, who saw with fresh eyes and described with foreign metaphors, giving us a priceless account but one filtered through a cultural lens. The Egyptian silence, therefore, is not an empty space, it is an active part of the mystery. It asks us to listen more carefully to what is not said, to read between the lines of both the classical praise and the native administrative records, and to accept that some wonders live on most vividly not in the archives of their builders, but in the lasting awe they inspired in strangers. The Greek mind did not travel to Egypt with a blank slate, but with a library of myths and a powerful appetite for the sublime. When Herodotus and those who followed stood before the ruins of a civilization millennia older than their own, they were not just observers, they were interpreters, translating a foreign reality through the vivid vocabulary of their own culture. For them, Egypt was the ultimate source of ancient wisdom, a land where the gods once walked and where human ambition had literally been set in stone. Their accounts belong to a specific tradition, the genre of the thoma or marvel, where the primary goal was not just to inform, but to astonish and inspire profound wonder in the reader. Accuracy was important, but emotional impact was paramount. A story could be true in spirit, even if its details were polished to a brighter shine. This cultural lens is crucial for our search. The staggering number 3,000 rooms, for instance, might be less an architect's count and more a storyteller's symbol for a number beyond counting, a way to convey a feeling of infinite complexity that mere facts could not capture. The description of polished stone halls might blend the reality of a grand temple's inner sanctum with the gleaming ideal of what such a place should be. This is not an accusation of fabrication, but an acknowledgement of a different way of seeing. The Greek writers were grappling with a scale of achievement that challenged their own world's frame of reference. In the face of that, a degree of amplification was almost inevitable, a literary tool to bridge the gap between what they saw and what their audience back home could possibly comprehend. To read Herodotus as a modern field report is to misunderstand him. He is our first and most important witness, but he is also a narrator, carefully crafting a sense of awe that would ensure the labyrinth lived forever in the imagination, even if its stones did not survive in the desert. This perspective doesn't empty the accounts of value, it enriches them. It asks us to listen for the core truth within the poetic embellishment, the consistent geographical location, the association with a specific pharaoh and a crocodile cult, the sheer scale of the foundations later found. These are the resilient facts that likely survived the journey through the Greek cultural filter. The labyrinth they described may have been a slightly grander, more mythically resonant version of the original, but that very act of glorification is its own historical evidence. It proves that what the Egyptians built was so fundamentally impressive that it demanded translation into the language of legend, becoming not just a building, but a benchmark for human wonder itself. This search for a lost wonder is far more than a treasure hunt. It stands as a masterclass in how modern archaeology actually works, a slow, careful dance between hope and hard evidence. The quest for the labyrinth has never relied on a single tool or a lone expert's hunch. It is, by necessity, an interdisciplinary puzzle. Philologists meticulously dissect the words of Herodotus and Strabo, weighing each adjective for clues. Historians cross-reference their accounts with Egyptian administrative papyri, searching for any mention of a great enclosure. Geologists study the Fayyum soil, asking if the land could even support such a massive foundation. And of course, the geophysicists scan the earth with radar and resistivity, painting digital ghosts of what lies beneath. Each field speaks a different language, but together they form a single, more complete question. This process forces a constant, healthy tension between text and dirt. On one hand, you have vivid, compelling stories written by respected ancient observers. On the other, you have a material record that is frustratingly silent or ambiguous. Do you trust the story to guide the shovel, or do you let the soil tell its own story, even if it contradicts the legend? This is the core dilemma of historical archaeology. The labyrinth search perfectly illustrates that our goal is not simply to prove a text right or wrong, but to understand the gap between the two. Why did the Greeks describe it this way? What were they seeing, or what had they been told that inspired such awe? The answer often lies not in a single discovery, but in the cultural space between the builders and the reporters. Furthermore, this mystery brings the practical and ethical realities of excavation into sharp focus. It's easy to imagine simply digging up the entire site at Hawara. But archaeology is destruction. You cannot excavate the same square twice. Every layer removed is gone forever, so the decision of where to dig and when to stop carries immense weight. Today's archaeologists must balance the desire for knowledge with the responsibility of preservation. They must consider the living landscape above, the rights of local communities, and the finite nature of both funding and the resource itself. Sometimes the most ethical choice is to wait, to let technology improve, or to leave the site for future generations with better methods. Ultimately, this long investigation teaches us that archaeology's greatest value may not be in the object found, but in the understanding gained along the way. Even if a definitive labyrinth, in the form Herodotus described, is never unearthed, the search has been a resounding success. It has compelled us to map the Fayyum in incredible detail, revealing the true scale of Amenemhat III's hydrological revolution. It has deepened our appreciation for his reign as a period of profound administrative and economic organization, and it has illuminated with brilliant clarity how the classical world viewed and mythologized ancient Egypt. The labyrinth, whether it was a building, a waterway, or an idea, acted as a powerful lens. By looking through it for so long, we haven't just been searching for stones, we've been focusing our understanding of an entire civilization and its enduring echo across time. The real discovery isn't a place on a map, but a richer, more nuanced story of human achievement. A monument that immense does not simply fade from memory without a cause. Its final disappearance is a second mystery, one that forces us to look at the powerful forces, both natural and human, that reshape history. If the labyrinth once stood, what final act removed it so completely from the landscape? The answer likely lies in a combination of relentless pressures, each leaving its own distinct fingerprint on the ruins. A sudden, violent end is one possibility. The Fayyum region, like much of Egypt, sits within a seismic zone. A major earthquake in late antiquity could have been the final blow to a structure already weakened by centuries of stone robbing. Such an event would not have needed to reduce polished halls to dust. It could have simply toppled the remaining upper walls of the mud brick core, collapsing the labyrinth skeleton into an indistinguishable heap of rubble. This scenario paints an end of dramatic, instantaneous loss, a natural cataclysm that finished what human hands had begun, burying the last recognizable outlines under tons of earth and shattered brick. Water presents a more gradual but equally effective agent of oblivion. The labyrinth's fate was always tied to the hydrology of the Fayyum. A significant shift in the Nile's flood patterns, or a failure to maintain the intricate dikes and canals built by Amenemhat III, could have led to a sustained rise in the water table or even direct flooding from Lake Moeris. Over decades, silty water would have seeped into foundations, destabilizing walls, while layers of fertile mud slowly buried the lower chambers. This would be a quiet end, a slow submersion rather than a violent collapse. The labyrinth would have been swallowed by the very element it was built to control, its rooms filling with sediment until they became nothing more than anomalous shapes deep beneath the farmland, hidden not by malice, but by the neglected landscape it once commanded. Yet the most poignant theory involves a deliberate choice. As Christianity spread across Egypt from the 4th century onward, the old gods were systematically rejected. Temples were closed, rituals forbidden, and pagan monuments were often dismantled or repurposed. A vast complex dedicated to the crocodile god Sobek and a deified pharaoh would have represented a potent, sprawling symbol of the old faith. Its systematic dismantling could have been an act of ideological cleansing, a campaign to erase a powerful site of pagan memory and to harvest its pre-cut stone for new churches and towns. This scenario transforms the loss from an accident of nature into a calculated historical transition. Each stone carted away served a dual purpose, building the new world while burying the old. The labyrinth's erasure, in this light, becomes part of a profound cultural shift, its physical form sacrificed to the changing beliefs of a new era. Each of these endings, the quake, the flood, or the deliberate dismantling, tells a different story about the passage of time. One is a tale of random natural force, another of environmental change, and the third of conscious human transformation. They are not mutually exclusive either. A structure first quarried for its stone, then weakened by floodwaters, could have finally been leveled by a tremor. The true cause of the labyrinth's final demise may forever be a mystery nested within the larger one, a reminder that the end of a wonder is rarely a simple event, but a confluence of time, nature, and the inexorable turn of human history. When the stones are silent, the stories grow louder. In our modern world, far removed from the sands of the Fayyum, the lost labyrinth has undergone a remarkable symbolic revival, finding fertile ground not in archaeology, but in the realms of esoteric thought and alternative history. Here, it is no longer just Amenemhat III's mortuary complex or a hydraulic marvel. It transforms into something far grander, a keystone in a hidden narrative of the ancient past. In these circles, the labyrinth is frequently reimagined as a repository for lost knowledge, a library in stone holding the advanced wisdom of a forgotten age, perhaps even a direct link to the legendary civilization of Atlantis. Some speculations suggest it housed sophisticated technologies, energy systems, or cosmological data far beyond what mainstream history credits to the Bronze Age. These ideas, while captivating, exist entirely outside the framework of academic Egyptology, lacking any support from the material record or textual evidence. Yet their very existence is profoundly telling. They are not really about the labyrinth as it was, but about the labyrinth as we need it to be. The immense void left by its physical disappearance creates a perfect vacuum, and nature, along with human imagination, abhors a vacuum. When definitive answers are buried too deep to find, the mind instinctively rushes in to construct meaning, weaving new myths from the threads of old mysteries. This process reveals the structure's enduring potency not as a building but as a symbol. It has become a blank canvas for our deepest curiosities about the past, a stand-in for any ultimate, unreachable secret. The shift from historical puzzle to modern myth is a fascinating journey in itself. It shows how an ancient wonder can escape the confines of its own time and culture to become a universal archetype. In esoteric thought, the labyrinth's confusing corridors are no longer just an architectural feature. They represent the initiatory path to hidden truth, the difficult journey one must undertake to access forbidden knowledge. Its reported subterranean level becomes a metaphor for the subconscious, or for ancient wisdom buried by time and catastrophe. This symbolic repurposing ensures the labyrinth's survival in the collective imagination long after its last stone was carted away. It becomes a modern myth in the making, constantly adapting to new theories and spiritual movements, proving that some structures are too powerful to remain merely in the past. Their true legacy is their endless capacity to inspire wonder, to make us ask not just what was, but what might have been, keeping the mystery alive in a new and ever-evolving form. The ground itself is the final archive, holding fragments of a story it refuses to tell in full. To walk the proposed site at Hawara today is to step into a landscape of whispers. You stand near the crumbling mud brick core of Amenemhat III's pyramid, a weathered sentinel overlooking a flat, sun-baked plain. The first thing you notice is not a grand wall or a towering column, but the ground underfoot. It crunches. Scattered everywhere are countless fragments of stone, not the local brown limestone, but dark, gleaming chips of imported black granite, greenish basalt, and fine white limestone. These are not native to this place. Each one represents a tremendous effort, quarried from distant sites along the Nile and transported here with immense labor, a clear signal that something far beyond ordinary mud brick construction once rose from this dust. Your eye adjusts and you begin to see the pottery, a kaleidoscope of broken history. Shards from the time of the pharaohs lie mixed with pieces from the Roman era, from the Coptic period, and later. They are like confetti from a parade that lasted 2,000 years, each fragment a silent witness to the generations who lived, worked, or scavenged here. These surface finds are the ultimate democratic evidence. They confirm intense, prolonged human activity on a staggering scale, but they stubbornly refuse to assemble into a single, coherent image. They are echoes without a clear source, clues that point to a monumental presence but leave its exact shape and purpose maddeningly open to interpretation. This is the raw, unglamorous reality of the search. You are not confronting a majestic ruin, you are sifting through the aftermath. Every imported stone chip is a testament to vanished grandeur, a ghost of a polished wall or a massive statue base. Every scatter of pottery marks a floor, a courtyard, a place where people gathered. Yet together they form a cacophony, not a chorus. It invites you, the visitor, to become a detective standing at a cosmic crime scene, trying to reconstruct a magnificent, vanished object from a billion scattered pieces, knowing most of them are missing forever. The sands offer proof, but they guard their ultimate secret in plain sight, reminding us that some histories are written not in chapters, but in fragments, waiting for a story to give them meaning. We can step through the gateway of data into a world rebuilt with light and shadow. The virtual reconstructions born from radar scans and historical clues offer more than a pretty picture. They are a bridge to a lost human experience. Picture yourself approaching not a ruin, but the completed monument at its zenith. The first overwhelming sensation is of sheer vertical scale, a gateway rising like a cliff face, its surfaces alive with carved reliefs proclaiming the pharaoh's titles and the glory of Sobek. Passing beneath this stone testament, you emerge into a vast, sun-drenched courtyard, its floor paved in polished limestone that reflects the brilliant blue sky. Colonnades of painted pillars line the perimeter, each capital carved in the shape of a papyrus bud, symbolizing the fertile marsh from which this entire complex sprung. The air here is warm and carries distant echoes, the murmur of priests, the shuffle of sandaled feet, the faint scent of incense drifting from a nearby shrine. This is the public face of the Labyrinth, a space designed to stun and subordinate. You move from this first court into a second, and the layout seems to mirror the first, yet the statues are different. The hieroglyphs tell another chapter of the king's deeds. The repetition is deliberate, an architectural rhythm meant to disorient, to make you feel you are walking in a circle even as you move forward on a straight axis. The sun beats down, the colonnades cast long, repeating shadows, and the sheer redundancy of grandeur begins to weigh on the senses. This is the genius of the upper labyrinth. It uses awe as a tool, surrounding you with proof of power until you feel small within its perfect, endless order. Then a change in the air. At the far end of a final, grandest court, a broad, downward-sloping ramp beckons, its entrance flanked by statues of the crocodile god. As you descend, the temperature drops noticeably, a welcome coolness that quickly becomes a penetrating chill. The sounds of the world above fade, replaced by an absolute, ringing silence broken only by your own footsteps. The ramp levels out, and you stand at the threshold of the underworld. Torches, held by unseen hands in the reconstruction, cast a dancing, unstable light. The world opens into a forest of stone, a seemingly infinite hall of massive, rectangular pillars stretching into darkness in every direction. The ceiling is low, oppressive, close enough to touch. The pillars are unadorned, sheer and functional, their shadows merging into a single pool of blackness between each island of flickering light. Here, there are no murals of the sun god, no celebrations of earthly life. The air is still and smells of ancient dust and damp stone. This is the realm of permanence, of secrets, of eternal things. You might glimpse a recessed niche holding a silent, stone sarcophagus or a side chamber sealed with a granite slab. The psychological shift is total and profound. The journey from the repetitive, sunlit order above to this chaotic, dark infinity below recreates the entire Egyptian cosmos in a single, walkable path. You have moved from the known world into the duat itself. While this virtual walkthrough is a hypothesis, a best guess woven from threads of evidence, its value is immeasurable. It transforms the number 3,000 rooms from an abstract statistic into a felt experience of distance and disorientation. It turns the phrase sacred crocodile tomb from an academic note into a chilling glimpse of a shadowy crypt. This digital model does not prove the labyrinth existed as described, but it powerfully demonstrates why the story persisted for millennia. It makes the emotional truth of the legend tangible, allowing us to feel, just for a moment, the overwhelming weight of sacred power that Amenemhat III sought to make eternal. A story can build a nation in the mind long before a shovel ever breaks the ground. The persistent tale of the Egyptian labyrinth, echoing from classical scrolls to modern search engines, did far more than describe a building. It laid a cornerstone for how the entire Western world would come to see Egypt itself. For centuries, with no physical evidence to contradict it, the narrative of a 3,000-room maze became accepted truth, a definitive data point in a grand calculation of ancient capability. This single, unverified account cemented an image of Egypt as a land not just of history, but of superhuman antiquity, a civilization that operated on a scale so vast it bordered on the mythological. The labyrinth stood as the ultimate proof that in Egypt, the normal rules of human achievement did not apply, that its architects thought in millennia and built for gods. This perception became a powerful filter coloring every subsequent encounter. When Renaissance artists like Pinturicchio painted frescoes of ancient wisdom, they often included labyrinthine motifs, channeling that classical awe into a new visual language for the mysterious East. The legend directly fueled the scholarly ambitions behind Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798. His corps of savants, not only soldiers but archaeologists and cartographers hungry to map a land they believed held such lost wonders. They went expecting to find the footprints of giants, and that expectation shaped what they looked for and at times what they thought they saw. Even the very design of our great museums, those 19th-century temples of knowledge, reflects this inherited awe. The vast, echoing halls of the British Museum or the Louvre, with their endless galleries of colossal statues and room after room of artifacts, consciously recreate that feeling of overwhelming, labyrinthine scale. Walking through them is meant to induce a modern version of the disorientation Herodotus described, a humbling journey through the staggering breadth of a civilization. In this way, the lost labyrinth never truly vanished. It simply migrated from the Fayyum desert into the architecture of our thought. Its physical absence granted it a unique power. It became a perfect idea, impossible to disprove and endlessly adaptable. It could represent ancient genius, impenetrable mystery, or the sublime limits of engineering. This malleable legend proved that a void can exert a stronger gravitational pull on history than a mountain of stone, actively shaping centuries of exploration, art, and scholarship. The labyrinth we have been searching for was never just under the sand. It was woven into the very fabric of how we understand the past, a ghost monument that built more in the imagination than it ever could in limestone. The true nature of the labyrinth is not a single mystery, but a constellation of puzzles that shine brighter the closer we look. We are left with fundamental questions that refuse to settle into easy answers. Was it one unified structure, a single, roofed maze of 3,000 rooms, or was it a distributed complex, a ceremonial landscape of temples, courts, and colossi spread across the Fayyum? Each interpretation paints a different picture of Egyptian power. Was its primary heartbeat religious, centered on the cult of Sobek, or was it administrative, the bureaucratic engine of a reclaimed province, or was it funerary, an eternal machine for a pharaoh's afterlife? The evidence whispers that it was likely all three, a seamless fusion that defies our modern categories. Perhaps the most persistent puzzle is the voice of our earliest guides. How much did Herodotus and Strabo, writing for a Greek audience hungry for wonders, amplify what they saw? Did 3,000 rooms mean a literal count, or was it a poetic way to say beyond counting? Their accounts are our starting line, but we must run the race with our own eyes on the ground. And then there is the most tantalizing clue of our own era. The compelling grid patterns revealed by radar at Hawara. Do they finally trace the ghostly blueprint of the labyrinth itself, or do they represent the remains of a different, equally massive but historically unknown compound, perhaps a later Roman administrative center or a vast storage depot? This question sits at the very frontier of the search. These are not failures of the investigation, they are its engines. Every unanswered question is an invitation, a door left ajar for the next researcher, the next technology, the next curious mind. They ensure the lost labyrinth remains an open case, a living conversation between the silent past and our inquiring present, a dialogue that is never fully, and perhaps should never be, closed. The next breakthrough might not come from a shovel, but from a particle born in the upper atmosphere. Muon tomography, a revolutionary imaging technique, uses these cosmic rays that constantly rain down on Earth to see through hundreds of feet of solid rock. Where ground-penetrating radar gives us a detailed map of the first few meters, muons could reveal the true depth and layout of any remaining subterranean chambers at Hawara, distinguishing between a natural clay layer and the distinct void of a carved corridor or a sealed tomb. Alongside this, artificial intelligence is being trained to scour decades of satellite and drone imagery, detecting patterns of subsurface disturbance invisible to the human eye. These technologies promise a non-invasive census of the buried past, creating a three-dimensional blueprint of the entire site before a single trench is opened. This data could finally answer the scale question, revealing whether the foundations form a single, colossal footprint or a cluster of separate, interconnected complexes. The goal is no longer to dig blindly, but to excavate with surgical precision, guided by a complete understanding of what lies beneath. This shift from exploration to targeted revelation marks a new era in the quest, one where technology acts as a key to the past, not just a tool for measuring its fragments. Parallel to these silent scans, a more human endeavor is gaining momentum. There is a growing, concerted push within the global archaeological community to organize a new international mission to Hawara. This would not be a small seasonal dig, but a coordinated, multidisciplinary project on the scale of those that once uncovered great capitals. Its purpose would be to finally follow the radar maps to their conclusion, to excavate key junctions and wall lines to confirm their nature and date. Such an undertaking, however, exists at the intersection of immense possibility and profound practical challenge. It requires not only substantial, sustained funding from institutions and patrons, but also delicate negotiations for permissions that balance research imperatives with the rights and lives of the modern community living atop this history. The labyrinth, if it is there, lies under a landscape of homes and fields, making any large-scale excavation a matter of careful diplomacy and community partnership as much as archaeological skill. The dream, however, remains a powerful catalyst for a new generation of researchers, the chance to solve this millennia-old riddle, to physically touch the stones that so confounded Herodotus, represents the ultimate scholarly adventure. It is the lure of turning a legend into a ledger, of replacing awe with understanding. The story of the lost labyrinth, therefore, is far from over. Its next chapter may well be written in a collaboration between particle physicists and philologists, between satellite algorithms and patient hands brushing away sand. Whether the final revelation comes from a muon detector's readout or the gradual exposure of a grand processional way, the search itself continues to refine our methods and expand our imagination. The sands of the Fayyum have kept their secret for over 2,000 years, but they are now being watched by eyes that see in ways the ancients could never have conceived. The enduring mystery proves that some questions are so compelling they transcend their own answers, driving innovation and curiosity across centuries. We await the moment when a single, clear line of cut stone emerges from the earth, not as an end to the story, but as the long-awaited beginning of a new one, where the legend finally meets the ground upon which it was built. That enduring search is itself the final, and perhaps most important, chapter of this story. The lost labyrinth of Egypt stands not as a solved equation, but as a permanent crossroads where history, archaeology, and legend meet. It is a ghost monument whose shadow, cast by the stories told about it, is infinitely longer than any substance its stones may have once possessed. We have walked from the vivid, earnest pages of Herodotus through the measured observations of Roman scholars, across the shattered stone fields noted by early explorers, and into the silent, digital echoes revealed by 21st century radar. Along that journey, the labyrinth refused to be just one thing. Its shape shifted before our eyes, appearing as a colossal temple complex, a sprawling administrative capital, a sacred crocodile necropolis, and even as the very waterworks that fed a kingdom. This very multiplicity is the clue to its true nature. It was likely all these things intertwined, a manifestation of a worldview that saw no separation between governing a province, worshipping a god, and securing eternity. Its enduring mystery, therefore, does more than just highlight a gap in our historical map. It actively illuminates the edges of that map, showing us where our knowledge ends and our curiosity must begin. This story challenges us in profound ways. It asks us to read ancient sources with both respect and healthy skepticism, understanding that a Greek traveler's wonder is a different kind of truth than an archaeologist's stratigraphy. It demonstrates why real discovery demands an interdisciplinary mind, where geology, hydrology, philology, and satellite imaging must all speak to one another. Most of all, the labyrinth's absence cultivates a necessary humility. It reminds us that the grand narratives of the past are built on fragments, and that for every towering pyramid we can still visit, there may be a dozen wonders that have dissolved back into the earth, leaving only a rumor and a compelling void. The stones may be lost, but the search for them has permanently enriched our understanding. It has taught us how a civilization thinks, how legends are born, and how the human desire to solve a great mystery can, over centuries, become a wonder all its own. The labyrinth's greatest legacy is not a floor plan, but the endless path of inquiry it laid down, a path we are still walking today.